Hi, my name is Satyanarayan, and in this video, I'm going to talk about the cutoffs for the IPMATs. An integrated program in management aptitude or admission test is a test conducted by both IIM Indore and IIM Rohtak separately for admission into various institutes. While colleges like IIM Indore, Nirma University Institute of Management, and IIM Ranchi consider the score of the IPMAT conducted by Indore, Rohtak conducts its own separate IPMAT for admission into their institute. Now, before we take a look at the cutoffs of the past years, it is important to understand the basic concept of what is meant by the cutoff marks. To understand that, let us first understand that a cutoff mark is nothing but the minimum marks required to qualify for the next selection round. This is a qualifier mark. It does not mean that if you have scored so many marks, which is above the cutoff, then you are guaranteed admission. No, it only means that you are eligible for the next process. Now, as management institutes like the IIMs conduct the selection process in multiple steps, this is just the first step. So, any student who has secured more than the specified cutoff marks would only be eligible for the second process, which normally would be a personal interview or a writing ability test. The cutoff marks for a particular year are not predetermined. It depends on multiple factors, which include the number of students who can be invited for the next part of the selection process, in this case, the interview and the writing ability test, or the difficult level of that particular examination, or the competence of the students who have appeared in the exam. To take an example, supposing the IIM Indore has the capacity of, let us say, 100 seats, and it is had a rule that it would select 100 students for those seats, but it would invite six times the number of students for the second round post the written examination. That means it can allow 600 students to appear for the interview rounds, from which it is going to shortlist 100 students for the final selection. So, the score obtained by the 600th student would be the cutoff of that year. For example, in a 100-mark paper, let us say that the 600th student stands at 80 marks. Then any person scoring 80 or above would be within the first 600, and that would be the shortlist for the process of personal interview. Any person who has scored less than 80 would have a rank which is below the 600th rank and would not be qualified for the second round. So in our case, the 600th rank, because 6 times the number of seats means 600th person's score is the cutoff for that year. This implies that the cutoff can only be known after the exam has been conducted, the papers have been evaluated, and the mark sheet been compiled. Now, if the paper was easy, then the 600 students, or rather students from rank 1 to 600, would have scored very high. So the cutoff would be very high that year. And if the paper was relatively difficult, then even a low score would maybe get you a rank within the top 600, making the cutoff pretty low for that particular year. Again, it also depends on how intelligent the students are. If the students are extremely bright, the cutoffs will be pushed higher, and vice versa. So cutoff for any particular year, remember, is not a predetermined thing. It all depends on how tough or otherwise the paper was and what was the level of the students who appeared for the examination in that particular year. Keeping that in mind, we will quickly take a look at the scores of the cutoffs for both IPMAT conducted by Indore and Rohtak. Keep in mind that over the years, the number of questions in the paper was not the same. While certain years, the number of questions were higher, in other years, the number of questions were lower. So we cannot do a direct numeric comparison of the marks. Also, the difficulty level of the paper is not standardized, so higher cutoffs simply imply that the paper was easy, lower cutoffs simply imply that the paper would have been difficult. As on date, we have received the cutoffs for only 2020 till 2022. For 2023, the results are just out and the official cutoffs are still in process. So in 2022, the general category cutoff was 175. This was much higher than 2021, 117, 107, which dipped from 2020. But in 2019, the cutoff, and this is the overall cutoff score, so both seem to be pretty high. And similarly, you can see the cutoffs for all the categories. the EWS or economic weaker sections, the non-creamy other backward classes, scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and the persons with disability. Let's also take a look at the cutoffs for IPM Rohtak from 2019 to 23 because the current year's data is also available. As you can see, the current year's cutoff are extremely high, whereas the cutoffs in the year 2020 were extremely low. So much so that the lowest cutoff of 2023 was way higher than the highest cutoff of a category in 2020. Let's also take a look at the section-wise scores of IPMAT IIM Indore because IPMAT IIM Indore insists that there must be a minimum score in every individual section that a student must get, other than also getting an overall score of cutoff to be eligible for the next round. So in 2023, while IIPM Rohtak had these cutoffs, in 22, if I take a look, then in the general category students required to score at least 20 in the short answer questions of quant or maths, 43 in the MCQs of maths, and 112 in the verbal ability, which means that even if a student scored more than the overall total, but if the individual score in any one of the sections was lower than the cutoff of that year, they would not be invited for the next round. And this is the reason why students having a higher overall score would not have been invited, and students who had a lower overall score would still have been invited if the individual sectional cutoffs were higher. We'll quickly take a look at the data for Rohtak in 22, the cutoff for Indore in 21 and Rohtak in 21, the scores for Indore in 2020, for Rohtak in 2020, and the scores of Indore in 2019, along with Rohtak in 2019. I hope this gives you some clarity on what are cutoffs and how the trends are and why it is extremely difficult to make any prediction before the official figures are released by the respective institutes. Wish you all the best and have a good day.